welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health educator and a health entrepreneur by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 125, we're joined by Jenn Trepeck. Now, Jenn is actually a business person by academic training and throughout the early part of her career that's transitioned into a career as a wellness entrepreneur. And this podcast is going to blend her two areas of knowledge and her two passions, which is business and wellness, to teach a little bit on how to become a successful wellness entrepreneur. She's built her own wellness business. She's grown it over the years, so much so that she's able to do it full time now. And she has a very interesting perspective on some best practices to grow your fitness and wellness business. As I say many times, although we talk a lot about science on this podcast, we also have to talk about the business element of things, because that is a big part of making sure you could provide your services to the people who need them the most. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. It's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 125. Please enjoy this conversation with Jenn Trepeck. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Jenn Trepeck. Jenn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm super excited. Found out before we got on the air that you are a fellow Michigan alum who's now based in New York. So go Blue.
Go Blue. Yes. I'll be back September, the weekend after Labor Day, whatever it is. I'll have to find you.
All right. Yeah, indeed. Back for a football game. Never an easy thing to try to find somebody at a Michigan football game, but we're going to do our best. So although this is not a podcast about Michigan football today, so we're going to dive into an interesting discussion around building a business. And I love business topics on the podcast. We spend a lot of time talking to other people in the exercise physiology, exercise science realm about the nuts and bolts of how to do programming and work with people. But I've said this many times, if you don't make money, you have a hobby, you don't have a job, and you're not going to be doing it for very long. So it's very important that we talk through some business aspects on this podcast. And that's what we're going to dive into. But before we get into that, Jenn, why don't you give our audience a little bit of an idea of your background, just to provide some context?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Michigan, suburbs of Detroit, and went to the business school at Michigan. I studied marketing and organizational behavior, and then moved to New York, worked in an ad agency that specialized in catalogs, went in-house with one of my clients as a photo shoot producer, and then kind of made my way into hedge funds on the administrative side, which, considering business school, the hedge fund thing actually made more sense than like the ad agency thing. But, nevertheless.
So far, this is pretty far away from anything that we know about now.
I know.
So I'm curious to hear where the pivot happens.
Right. So while all of that was going on, I grew up a dancer, and I sort of joke that I was the skinny one in a family of dieters. And then between high school and college, I started to gain weight. So I was like, okay, I know what to do. I watched my family do this my whole life, right? And I did every diet under the sun, gained and lost, up and down, lived on that roller coaster. And then I graduated from college, moved to New York. I'm working in these crazy jobs and realize I don't know what I'm going to do. I just know that I can't work for somebody else for the rest of my life. And I was looking for something to do in my spare time to eventually just take all that money and invest it and be able to retire early, or, come up with something, my own business or whatever. And then worlds collided when I learned about the curriculum that I based my practice on. So as I said, I was looking for things And at first I learned about the curriculum and I was like, no, that's okay. I don't need your thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I thought I had all the answers as my own, weight management guide. Right. And then there was this woman who told her story of removing like 150 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, everything she said after that, I didn't even hear. I was staring at her and I'm having like a conversation with myself in my own head of like, Jennifer, they know something you don't know. Because with everything you know, that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
She's saying the equivalent of another human was attached to her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worked with a coach. I followed the program myself, completely changed my life. Like the only thing that allowed me to say I'd kick my food issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt like it was the nutrition education we're all supposed to know and no one ever taught us.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, why isn't this what we learned? And everybody deserves this information. So I was like, okay, this is my thing. This is what I'm going to do outside of my full-time job. And so I launched my practice on the side. This was late 2007. So before health coaching was really so mainstream, before side hustles were so much of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I built my practice nights and weekends.
Mm.
And then July of 2019, I left my full-time job, launched my podcast, Salad with a Side of Fries,
Mm-hmm.
in August of 2019. And, since then I have a few ventures in the wellness space and I get to be here talking to you.
Wow, what an amazing career pivot. But I feel like in a lot of cases, when people do make that career pivot, it's because they found something that is, deeply meaningful to them that they want to give to the world. But, it doesn't take, it takes a lot of courage, fortitude, and skill to be able to, particularly living in a place like New York, completely move out of the business world into, the fitness and wellness space and be successful. So
Yeah.
that's really what we're going to dive into on this podcast, is kind of how you went about, building your business as a wellness entrepreneur. And I'm sure there's so many lessons that we could unpack here. So I'll just let you teach on this. What are some of the big lessons that you learned that you think could be valuable for our audience?
Yeah. So I think you started to talk about this even in introducing it, right? It was that we have our own job for a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to draw the distinction between, do you now own your own job or do you have a business?
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the difference, right? Owning our own job means that still, if we don't work, we don't get paid.
Mm-hmm.
Versus having a business means that there are revenue streams
Mm-hmm.
or other people, right? A revenue stream, right? Where it's okay if we aren't physically there or physically showing up to work. So the first piece that I would say to everybody is fundamentally consider your multiple streams of income. How can you create leverage, right? How can we take even a single existing relationship and build on that, right? So common phrase in business, right? There's market share and then there's share of customer.
Mm-hmm.
Market share is much more expensive to create than share of customer. So
Mm-hmm.
share of customer is basically like, let's say you sold toothbrushes, right? Market share is trying to find every person on the planet who needs to buy a toothbrush and convince them that your toothbrush is better than somebody else's. Share of customer says, hey, you're already buying your toothbrush. Let's talk about your dental floss.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your toothpaste, right? And selling, even though that can be an ugly word, right? But selling another product to an existing customer, leveraging that relationship that already exists. So we're seeing it all the time in medical practices where they're bringing in cosmetic elements.
Yep.
Whether it's teeth whitening to the dentist or injectables into the dermatologist, right? It's all of these pieces of how can we share one more thing with an existing relationship. So for a lot of people that I work with in the, I come to all this from the nutrition side, right? I end up partnering with a lot of fitness professionals, right? And then we have a way that we can work together so that it benefits both of us, right? Financially. And then what we see also in the research is that by combining modalities, clients have exponential improvement over any single modality on its own.
Yes. Yes.
Right. In my practice, I work with supplementation, right? I'm recommending things already. I could be sending a lot of money to a vitamin store, or I could take responsibility for knowing the quality of the things that I'm recommending and keep those dollars inside the practice.
Right.
A lot of times people will say too, oh, especially when it comes to supplements, oh, I can't. You can. I work with a lot of health professionals who do. And by the way, if you're a health professional or in that space where you are making a recommendation and not helping ensure that your client or patient is finding a quality product, let's consider where the negligence is. Not to say anybody's negligent, but you know what I mean, right? Like, let's make sure that we're helping people, because they might go to the drugstore and be wasting their money or not getting the benefit that they could be from your recommendation.
Yeah, I think what you said to start that off is so important to underscore for any fitness or wellness professionals, that there's a big difference between, I mean, you say it a different way than I say it, but I talk about this a lot. There's a big difference between working in the business and working on the business. And so often,
Yes.
so many entrepreneurs in so many spaces, this is not unique to our space, get trapped in their business because it is literally a linear revenue generation model. You put in one more unit of effort, you get back 1 unit of money.
Yep.
And there is no passive revenue stream. So I think it's such an important starting point, because I'm sure you've seen this as well. So many fitness and wellness entrepreneurs just get stuck in their business. Like, it's going as long as they're going, but if they want to take a break, a vacation or whatever, then the revenue that they're generating just grinds to a halt.
Exactly. And so that kind of brings to, another piece, which is your personal wellness is critical. Because for a lot of us, we are our business. If we can't show up, there isn't revenue. So taking care of ourselves so that we can show up for the business, show up for our clients. And then the other thing is, you are your best billboard. Right? So if we aren't taking care of ourselves and saying, do as I say, not as I do, right? There's inherently going to be a disconnect in terms of growing your business, growing your practice as you're meeting new people.
Yeah. Did you, as you've gone through this process, is that something of growing your own business? Is that something you learned the hard way? Because I learned it the hard way.
We all did, right?
Yeah. So I feel like I was helping a lot of other people get in really great shape, and I was working 110-hour weeks, and I was 3 steps away, or sometimes on the workout floor, but couldn't find the time to do the workout. How have you found that you prioritize that for yourself?
Yeah, great question. So, well, first of all, I ended up in adrenal fatigue because I was working full-time in hedge funds, working with clients nights and weekends. It was literally too much in too little time, not sleeping enough, thinking I was fine. I was not fine. But yeah, so now I'm a big time blocker in my calendar, and I wasn't always this way, but now I am. So my workouts go in my calendar first, basically. They are in there as standing appointments. I also have other things in there that I need to do for myself or, for the business that are time blocked in there. And I might move it but I can't delete it.
Yep.
Right. So the workout piece is huge, right? For me to get that in every morning. Protecting at least one day a week
Mm.
to whether it's catch up on things or do nothing or, travel and those kinds of things. Because a lot of us, especially in this space, can end up working weekends,
Yep.
working nights and weekends.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about finding the times in the day that you can take to be yours.
Yeah.
Is it a walk in the afternoon because you're working all night, right? Because our clients want to see us after business hours.
Right.
So finding those times, and I think getting creative, being willing to hold to those time blocks. My favorite phrase is my next availability is.
Hard for an entrepreneur, right? Because
right.
Your next availability is someone that wants to keep growing their business is, whenever there's a free hour in your calendar. But that does lead to a lot of your own physical and mental health challenges as you're trying to help other people with those very same things. It's very funny. We do the same thing. Like my rule with my workout in my calendar is it can be moved. It just can't be deleted. And I think that's a really powerful message for people listening to hear.
Yeah. And prioritizing your own nutrition, right? And I say this, I eat out. I rarely have groceries, right? It's not that it requires all this time for meal prep and whatever, but knowing what your routine is it making sure that there's 30 minutes in the middle of your day for lunch?
Mm-hmm.
Is it making sure that you can, eat and go for a 10-minute walk? Those kinds of little things, what you need to feel like yourself.
Right, right. What else, Jenn? I feel like you've probably learned a lot. I feel like we probably could do several hours of an episode, but we're gonna try to be concise.
Yeah, well, I wanted to jump on something else that you shared about working in the business versus on the business.
Okay.
Right. So one of the best things I've learned, and this is a new one, I probably like the last 9 months, is it's called an I will day. So it is blocking out minimum 6 hours. One of the keys is to get out of your space. Like go somewhere else. Maybe there's some nature involved, right? 6 hours. All the phones off, the computer off, all the things. And it's a time to look at what are all of the things that I've committed to doing?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things I will do? What are the things I won't do? Mm-hmm. Even though I've committed to them, I need to now apologize.
Yep.
What are the things I can delegate? And what are the things that can be moved to a later date? So the first, admittedly, like I have to start this. It takes me a little bit to get into it. Like I got to do a bunch of things, right? Then I'm finally ready to sit down because everybody's like 6 hours. It does not take 6 hours to do that, right? But it does, right? It's getting into that mode, then sitting down. And the first is like brain dumping all of the things that are on our to-do list or that we've committed to do. So for example, another friend of mine is a practitioner and she wanted me to do a sample of her program and give her feedback. And it was something I was interested in for myself personally. And then it was like, I had to watch these videos or read the thing and it was never happening. And I sat down at this I will day and I was like, I'm not. I'm just not. And I had to send her an email and say, hey, I'm really sorry. I know I told you I would do this. It's just not happening. I'm sincerely, truly so sorry. And that's hard for a lot of us to do too, right?
It is hard to, I mean, you're admitting you're wrong on some level, and that's very hard for a lot of people to do.
Right.
But I think those of us who are entrepreneurs, we're doers, and we tend to say yes far more often than we say no. And I try to remind myself, saying yes to one thing means you are saying no to other things, or at least you should be saying no to other things. So 6 hours in the woods might be a good way to contemplate how you decide what you do, in fact, say yes and no to.
Right, exactly. So then as we go through this, right, and we're figuring out what are the things that I actually need to do, versus what can be delegated. And then you're going to delegate the things, you're going to, take on the things yourself. And this also gives a chance to say, wait, what's really working in my business? Right? If we look at the bottom line, what is working? Where am I in relation to the goal for the quarter or the year, whatever it is? And what's working and getting me there?
Yeah.
What's not working? What am I spending my time and money doing that is not contributing to the mission, vision, and bottom line? Right now, not everything has to go to the bottom line, right? Like there are some things that we do because we're passionate about it. That's amazing. It doesn't mean don't do those things, right? But it's sort of looking at the balance of where our time, effort, and energy is going. And then that gives us a little bit of space to step back and say, wait a minute, like there are projects and things that I wanted to do this year, and I haven't even started them because I've been so involved in the day-to-day. Right? What am I saying yes to that I need to delegate so that I can then work on these other things?
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little something about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, addressing the wellness paradox is a lifelong passion project for me. And when you're going to go on a long journey, it's difficult to go it alone. You need to find like-minded individuals that are willing to go on that crusade with you. And that's exactly what I found at the MRF Institute. The team over at the MRF Institute creates educational content for fitness and wellness professionals who are serious about becoming a part of our healthcare continuum. Getting on the healthcare continuum is all about leveling up our skills to be looked at as that valued resource provider. The wellness paradox is certainly an avenue for you to do that, but we need many different levers to pull if we're going to get there. And the MRF Institute is definitely one of those levers. You can go to their website, mrfinstitute.org, to find all kinds of great, informative, free informational content. And if you choose to engage with any of their paid content, they've created a coupon code specifically for Wellness Paradox listeners. You can enter in WP 2022, that's WP, and then the number 2022 to the website at checkout to receive a 15% discount on your purchase. I highly recommend you go check out mrfinstitute.org. Now back to today's episode. Yeah, you said two things there that are really important. One, and this is just an observation to make, and then we can move past it, is setting goals for the quarter, for the year.
Right.
It's very interesting how we go through the process of goal setting, smart goal setting with our clients. And then when it comes to our own business success, sometimes those don't get set. But I think that's a good point to mention, but we probably don't need to dive into it more. The thing I wanted to dive into for a second is you talked about delegating. And delegating kind of presupposes you have somebody to delegate to. So talk about that for a second, because I feel like that is a big step that solopreneurs sometimes struggle to take. And that's a lot of what we see in our field. It's the individual wellness coach, the individual exercise professional who's doing all the training themselves. And they think, well, delegate to who? I'm the only one that delegates. Right. So how have you thought about that? How have you gone about that? And how could our audience think about that?
Absolutely. So look at where your time is going. So if you've never done a sort of calendar audit of sorts or a time audit, it's really meticulously tracking your time for a little while to figure out how long do things actually take you, right? Where is all of our time going? And not in the realm of fantasy land where we think something's going to take 5 minutes and it doesn't, like even taking out the trash, like, let's be clear, right? Maybe it's a 5-minute, endeavor once I get up to do it, but it takes me 15 minutes. So then I need to block 20 minutes, right? So whatever. So realistically, where's our time going in the day? And then being able to look at any given time, do I have more time or more money? If we have more time than we have money, then we're probably going to keep more things
Mhm.
doing it ourselves.
Yep.
If we have more money than time, or if the cost of delegating this task is less than the amount of money that I could earn by working with a client for that same amount of time,
Mhm.
then it makes sense for us to delegate it.
Yep.
So delegating something doesn't have to mean all of a sudden we hire a staff.
Mhm.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that over the last few years has become much more common in terms of freelancers and, um, virtual assistants and all these resources that are out there. Right. And then there are also professional agencies that do almost anything we could think of we need done. Right. So if bookkeeping is the bane of your existence and it takes up all your time, then that might be something we want to hire, some help for. It might be a bookkeeper who's doing a couple hours a week, right? And it saves us a whole lot of headache and anxiety. Great. I have a business, not in the wellness space. I own a property management company
Mhm.
in New York. I do the invoicing myself. I do it once a month. It takes me like 2 to 3 hours.
Mhm.
Could I delegate it? Yes. Is it worth it to me? Not right now.
Hmm.
Because the system that I have in place for it, it's easier for me to do than to try to explain it to somebody else or, get them involved in figuring out how much time something took. Right. And it's 2 to 3 hours a month to bring in the revenue.
Yeah.
Right. That to me was too, if they made a mistake, it was too costly to me.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to do those 2 to 3 hours one day a month. Fine. There are other things like my social media, right? I have people who I delegate that stuff to. We have systems in place. We have, we created a structure that worked for us
Mhm.
because it was something that needed to be done, but my time and money were better spent, or my time was better spent elsewhere. It made sense for me to pay the money for the support.
You and me both on that.
Right. Right. Even in terms of a podcast, right? For a long time, I did it all myself.
Mhm.
And then it got to the point where there were certain pieces I wasn't willing to let go of, right? Like I still do all my own prep. I
Mhm.
do all my own guest booking because I do like a little bit of a pre-interview
Mhm.
with them. There are certain things, right, that I still do on my own. But now, for the last few years, I outsource the post-production,
Mhm.
right? The editing, the episode notes, those kinds of things. So I think when it comes to delegating, the things to remember that it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Mhm.
And it can start really small. It's about choosing the things that you're willing to let go of, where your time is better spent elsewhere. And then once you know what you're looking for that person to do, you can go out and find them, right? It might be a virtual assistant. It might be interviewing a handful of virtual assistants and looking for somebody who has the expertise that you're looking for. It might be talking around to people's kids and saying, who wants to learn something?
Yep.
I could teach you how to do this and it'll take a weight off my shoulders. So it doesn't have to be full-time employees the way we think delegating used to look like.
Yeah, that's such a good way to think of that, because it is, the gig economy has made this a different world. I feel like
Yeah.
that's something we can keep diving down, but I want to be sensitive to time. So, are there any other pearls of wisdom that you want to impart on us?
I think the last piece that we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about is what I call contemporary networking.
Hmm.
By which I mean, a lot of times networking gets sort of like a weird reputation, or people are like, I don't want to do that. It used to be like the business card shuffle,
Yeah.
right? Contemporary networking is more about building real relationships with people.
Mhm.
By building real relationships and getting to know people, you become a referral machine. And in turn, it comes back to you. So my friends all sort of joke that, like, I got a guy, right? They need somebody for something. I'm like, I got a guy. Like, you have these people in your phone, in your old Rolodex, right? We have these resources. So we build relationships with people and we make referrals. We connect them to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that comes back to us.
Mm.
Two things that need to happen. One, we have to be good at making those connections.
Mm-hmm.
So sending those connection emails or text messages, Michael, meet Jenn. Jenn does XYZ. Jenn, meet Michael. I wanted you guys to connect because, right? And tell me what Michael does, right? I'll let the two of you take it from here. Let me know what happens. Right? Can't wait to see what comes from this. Making those connections, letting them know why you thought they should meet each other. Or, hey, this happened the other day. My friend Dawn bought a new apartment. She needed an architect. I sent her 3 or 4 names separately. I sent those 3 or 4 people text messages that said, hey, I just gave your name to so-and-so, gave her a few people, but let me know if you talk to her, hope it works out. It's just about building those relationships and being giving in those relationships. And then we want to listen. We want to listen for people who say they're looking for something, right? So Dawn bought her apartment. Awesome. What are you going to do with it? Right? She's like, oh, well, okay, I know an architect, right? I can be of service. I can help in this way. So it's about how we're listening to make those connections. In our space with our clients, listening to what they're sharing, right? We're always having conversations with them that aren't necessarily about the thing that we work with them on, right? Yeah. I know somebody if you want a name. Just throwing it out there, planting a seed, and practice saying that. And then the flip side of all of that is to teach people how to refer you. Teach people the phrases that they're looking for someone to say when that would be a great time to refer you. Right? Let's say you're a trainer and this person, right? Like letting people know, I want to meet everybody, or the next time you hear somebody say they're just sort of bored with what they're doing, I want to meet them. Right? Well, what do I tell them? I want them to meet a trainer, right? No, tell them you have a trainer who's willing to talk to them 15 minutes, no charge. They're bored. I want to see how I can help. Right? Oh, well, now I know what to say. I know what I'm offering that person, and it makes a no-brainer connection. Right? Now, when that 15-minute call happens, you got to show up, right? You got to do the rest of the work. But teaching people how to make those referrals, right? Like even with some of my clients, I work with clients both one-on-one and in groups. So when we're working on forming a group, I'll say to them too, we can actually start the group sooner if we have the people. Who do you want to do this with? It's more fun with a buddy. I'm happy to talk to them and we'll do it together. Right? And then we're teaching them how to bring people into the fold and make those referrals to us.
Yeah, that's so the contemporary networking is such an interesting point. And I love how you frame that up with, both, being a resource for people, but also letting people know how you want to be described as a resource for others. I think we forget that step in the process and just assume that inherently, but somebody knows us and kind of what we do, that they're going to be able to articulate it. You know, Jenn, this has been a master class in a really short period of time of how to grow your fitness or your wellness business. If our audience wants to find more out about the stuff you're doing and the great work that you have going on, where can they go to find that information?
Absolutely. My website is asaladwithasideoffries.com. And I think we have a link for you for everybody to get a 30-minute complimentary business discovery call. So happy to offer that to everybody. And let's chat. I want to hear what's happening in your practice. What does it look like? Let's see how we can help you grow.
Great. So we will link up to that on the show notes page. And yeah, that's a great opportunity to unpack a lot of the things that we talked about here in a lot more individualized context, because all this stuff sounds great when you're having a conversation on a podcast, but at the end of the day, where the rubber meets the road is, how does this help your business? So this has been very insightful. And the last question I'd like to end the podcast with is the question I always do, which is, I view the wellness paradox as the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and the medical community. You come at this from a slightly different perspective with a business lens, although you are a practitioner in the space. If you could give our audience one piece of advice as to how to close off that gap, what would it be?
I have an entire business framed around this. Learn to speak their language. That's like, come to them speaking their language instead of trying to convince them to speak yours.
Mm-hmm. That is succinct, but it is profound, because it gets you on their level very quickly and shows humility and insight, which I think that's the key to forming that relationship. And I'm sure there's probably much more that you can dive into on something like that, and we'll leave that for the discovery calls that the audience can have with you. Jenn Trepeck, fellow U of M Wolverine, thank you for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jenn as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a big difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. That's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 125. Please be on the lookout for our next episode when it drops in 2 weeks. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next, please be well.